Welcome to a real cult classic, where we talk about, well, your favorite cult classics, a little bit of pop culture, a smattering of old Hollywood gossip with a side of scandal and intrigue. I'm your esteemed cult leader, Megs, from the Cult of Megs on the old Ticker Talkers, and this is my friend, your friend, cult elder, Auntie Amy. Amy, say hi to the cult.
Hey there, cultlings.
So, Amy, we're back at it again. Episode, I guess, for us two, but technically three, because we threw a wrench at them.
We did. And we've also filmed or recorded out of order a little bit too. We
We
let the
have.
weather dictate some recordings for us. We wanted cozy vibes because we are, as you know, in a rainy kind of couple of weeks in Vancouver. And that was nice. It was
It
nice to
was
just do things
nice.
out of order. Yeah, I loved it. But you're not experiencing the best, how should I put this? You're very sensitive to weather.
I am. I'm
Yeah,
just a sensitive soul.
you are. You're sort of teaching me that I might be as well. I don't even know that I have allergies, but you've guided me through this whole, pollen process.
I will teach you how the world is killing you one day at a time. That's what somebody was like, is my eczema from the outside? Because I pointed it out in a makeup video. I was like, yes, it is. Your
Oh
eczema
my
is probably from
gosh.
the outside.
Yeah, it's crazy how much it affects things.
Apparently, the aurora borealis can also have quite an effect because it's like magnetic things and the solar flares and stuff. And so, like, a lot of people had really bad headaches when we were getting the northern lights, and like, people
Really?
don't realize how much it impacts you. But my mother is a severe migraine sufferer, so she'll always check in and be like, "Hey, is the weather killing you?" And I'll be like, "Yippers."
I remember this about your ma.
Mm-hmm.
Migraines are quite debilitating. My dad has never experienced a single headache, and my mom is prone to headaches, and so am I. Not as bad, but I find that fascinating.
Well, it's like it can be a hormonal thing too, right? And like men
Uh,
don't, their hormone cycle faster than ours and aren't as intense as ours because we just get the shit end of the stick and everything. So, yeah.
yeah, that sounds about right. But you're feeling better today? Is it at least sunny?
I find that the it being really rainy and then sunny and then really rainy is worse than if I could just get 5 days of rain or 5 days of sunlight. The pollen is so bad that I could see it blowing past my 10th floor windows. And
Yeah.
my sinal cavities, I don't know if that's a word. I made it up. My sinus cavities are not my friends. It feels like somebody's like a little baby is digging their hand into my eyeball and pulling it out of my head.
Oh gosh, that's a terrifying image.
Just so people know like what we do to show up for them on this podcast.
That's right. It is a joy, though. We've been able to spend way more in person and, you know, time together, even online over Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
because right now we're on Zoom in our respective homes.
Because the people don't know that you did used to live downtown with me and then you moved over the bridge. And if you've never been to Vancouver, then like a bridge being between two, well, you might as well be in a different country.
It's true. It's very true. And depending on traffic, there are a whole bunch of different scenarios in which that commute is so much longer than what it can be. And it's hard to it's hard to time things. I find for myself when I do have things downtown now, I have a really hard time either um, just either showing up on time or early or late. Like I don't even know how to be late. I don't, you know what I mean? Like I don't know how to be early, on time, or late anymore. There are just so many factors that can um, go wrong in my travels. And I'm finding that a bit of an adjustment, which is, fine for me because I like being at home anyway. So I can just be my hobbit self.
Whenever I feel bad about the feeling like it's a long distance that I think most people would think is absurd, I remember that on Park and Granville, so like near 57th, which used to be the Rogers Sugar House. It's now like they converted it into a major development. that was the Rogers Sugar family's like I think it was their winter home, and then their summer home was downtown in the West End. So they would travel from Granville and Park to the West End to go to their summer home by like horse and buggy.
Oh
And that
my
was like the journey
gosh.
for them. And like we go up to the Okanagan for our summer homes, but for them, like that was the span. So I don't feel bad about it. I remind myself, I'm like the Rogers Sugar family
That is
used to
hilarious. Oh,
consider this like 20-minute drive with no traffic as their big, seasonal traversing of Vancouver to get to their summer home.
no, and Google Maps does not have a little icon for horse. It's either
It doesn't tell
bus,
you by horse and buggy. It's really
car.
offensive.
That would be my preferred method of travel,
Mm,
minus the buggy. I would love to and I wouldn't even ride the horse. I would just walk alongside
You
the
should have moved to
horse.
the Southlands where all of the horses are,
I should have done a lot of things in this life.
right?
But I do feel, as you know, I'm working my way through my dream animals. I told my husband recently that I've decided I will not feel fulfilled in my life if I pass away before rescuing a big draft horse or having, a bit of a hobby farm where I can just be surrounded by sweet animals. They're my they're my whole heart. I just need more animals.
I do love a baby goat.
I'll get one.
Okay, goats are really funny
They're so funny.
and they're very cute and they're very soft if you bathe
Mm-hmm.
them regularly. Like Disney used to have goats, and I would
Oh,
go
I didn't
visit
know
them.
that.
And they wore little bandanas. They'd wear seasonal bandanas based on what season it was, and you could go and you could pet them. And they were the most well taken care of goats I've ever seen in my life. And they had a donkey and a
Oh,
turkey.
I love donkeys.
Donkeys are
I
adorable.
They are so adorable. I actually fooled an entire office for years into thinking that I grew up with a donkey named Bandito. And I had to break it to them because my boss found out and it just became too weird. Like the lie became my life. And I would have to come up with so many stories about this donkey in my childhood that I had to come clean. And it devastated people. And I remember feeling, oh wow, I've lost the plot. This is actually a bit psychotic. I should
This is
have.
actually not the first time that you have told an elaborate lie in the workplace, though. Like when you said that you were related to or you were the heir to a mega Canadian based pharmacy chain.
I think it was no, this was my brother who um created a story about like my family dynasty, which does not exist, um, to entice his girlfriend to believe him. And so that when she met my parents, she would bring it up and it would be a big funny joke. And it was, but it was elaborate. Maybe it runs in my family. We do find that stuff funny. I
You do like to.
apologize.
Because I remember I then met the actual family that founded it. It was like Amy.
Do you remember Romy and Michelle's high school reunion where they go to the
Yes.
reunion and they lie about being the inventor of Post-its? Maybe that's where I got it from. I loved that part. I love that movie. I wonder if it's still funny. We should watch
Maybe
that
we should
too.
watch that. I feel like they still hold up in a different light. You're a little bit like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, but like it's still funny.
So what's our tally so far? We have to do Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf for you, Mean Girls for me. Which
Mhm.
one? I haven't seen either really.
The second one doesn't exist to me.
Oh, you
So
haven't seen
the
it?
original, no, it's like a musical, which just
Right.
feels offensive. The first one is
So
the only
you
one.
so you wouldn't even have an interest in seeing the musical like on Broadway
No.
or a
Oh, on
touring
Broadway,
production?
I would always, I always go to a show. No matter how terrible, Amy, when you drag me to the theater, I'm
I
always a
always
willing
drag you.
participant.
You are. You I'm telling you, you're a good sport about all that stuff. You
I
enjoy a
love it.
social life. Yeah, you
I
do
mean, I
love it.
don't say that because then people will be like, why don't you ever go to anything? I do like the theater. It's a dark room and I don't have to talk to anybody, so I don't know if I would
That's
think that's
true.
a social thing.
Concerts, theater,
Yeah.
movies, they all have that in common. You're right. You're more of an experience junkie, I would say. You love experiences and
I'm an
even
indoor
Disney.
cat, so if I
Yeah.
can go somewhere and like still be an indoor cat, then I do love Disney. I like a museum or a theme park. I just
Yeah.
like doing like I like
You know what it is about theme parks as well, and I don't know if this is like what it is for you, but it's like it's so big and there's so much to do that the pressure is off,
hmm
even though it would feel the opposite. But for me, I feel much more comfortable in spaces where nobody's worrying about what you're doing. And there's so much going on that you're not going to miss anything because you can, it's open all day. So I feel comforted by that, which
and there's
is kind of
snacks
weird. And there's so many snacks.
and like lots of shopping. I just like looking at stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Like I like
Same.
looking at stuff. It feels very nostalgic.
Well, Megan,
Well, apparently you have 10 pages worth of notes, so maybe we should get into your part two, part two of what are you covering this week, Amy?
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the film.
Yeah, with our old friends Liz and Dick.
So, first, I want to again credit the book Cocktails with George and Martha by Philip Gefter. I'm going to be reading excerpts from it like last time and adding my own thoughts. We'll leave a link in the description box for the book. I really recommend you pick it up if any of this is interesting to you. There's so much detail that I'm not going to go into. It's at least on my Kobo is close to 650 pages, which I've distilled down to, what you're going to hear now. All right. So last episode, we covered Edward Albee and the premiere of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf on Broadway. Now we're going to track how the play got made into a film, which includes the controversial casting choice of Liz Taylor as Martha and Richard Burton as George. A role, remember from last time, he was actually offered years earlier, but had to decline because he was off to Rome to film Cleopatra. Now, Megan, I have been reading so much about Liz Taylor that I had a dream last night that I had her double set of eyelashes, except mine were in my armpit, which I have to tell you, not a great place to have a double set of eyelashes.
It seems pokey.
Pokey, bit of a waste, a lot of maintenance. Anyway, but she has, penetrated my dreamscape at this point. Anyway, I digress. Let's continue. So the play opened on Broadway in October of 1962, as we know, and made a splash, as we also know. By 1963, the Oscar-nominated screenwriter Ernest Lehman, who wrote North by Northwest, The King and I, West Side Story, and Sabrina, was sent Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by his agent, Abe Lasvogel, who is one of the greatest talent agents in Hollywood's history, by the way, and who also represented Edward Albee. Now, the play disturbed Lehman, so he vowed never to see it. But when it opened on November 11th, 1963, for a 3-week run at the now demolished Biltmore Theater in Los Angeles, Lehman was dragged to see it by his wife. Afterwards, he said that the play destroyed him, and he told his agent as much on a phone call. Now, his agent mentioned that Jack Warner, the head of Warner Brothers, felt the same way about it. Lasvogel offered to connect Warner and Lehman, but Lehman, who was working on the little indie picture The Sound of Music at the time, declined the offer. But his agent was tenacious, as agents are, and ended up talking to Jack Warner, who wanted the play and requested that Lehman be the producer and writer. Lehman had the weekend to make up his mind. He accepted. While Lehman was a respected and first-rate screenwriter, he had never produced anything before. Lehman received a $250,000 contract with Warner Brothers, now that's over $2 million in today's dollars, to write the screenplay for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and to produce it, with full control over casting, the director, and the crew. Albee got $500,000 for the film rights, plus 10% of the gross once the film earned $6 million. Jack Warner promised Albee that Betty Davis and James Mason would be cast in the roles of Martha and George. It's who Albee wanted, and ultimately, as we know, not who he would end up getting. And Lehman was bombarded with suggestions on how to make the movie and whom to cast, but he had his own ideas, and they didn't include the promise Jack Warner made to Edward Albee. While names like Ingrid Bergman and Anne Bancroft decorated his notebook, he really got excited about the idea of Liz Taylor. Now, Lehman said people know how Uta Hagen played her. They certainly know how Betty Davis would do it, but they would wonder how Elizabeth Taylor would do it. So by 1964, Liz was the most famous woman in the world. And not just because of her beauty or her many films. No, at this point, her fame was linked to her affair with Richard Burton. So this is where you need to go back to Megan's TikTok channels and you have to rewatch or watch for the first time her videos on Liz and Richard Burton. She has two. So check them out and you'll get the sort of sense of why they were such a big deal, why this affair was so scandalous, and all the great details that Megan lays out for you. So Lehman got Liz's attention and she agreed to read Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She had heard about it but wasn't able to see the play before it closed. She asked Burton what he thought. Burton told Liz that although he thought she was too young to play Martha, that she had to play it to stop everyone else from playing it. And it was true. Everyone wanted to play this role. Taylor was reluctant. The character was an aging battle axe. Liz was only 32. She'd have to gain 20 pounds and be fitted with daily prosthetics to make her look 50-ish on screen. It was a concern to her and her agent and manager, but she told Lehman she would think about it. So meanwhile, Lehman made up a list of actors to play George. Some of those names included Peter O'Toole, Christopher Plummer, William Holden, Marlon Brando, and Gregory Peck. It wouldn't matter, though, because Lehman got word that Taylor would accept on the condition that Burton was cast as George. While Taylor was illogical to play Martha, Burton was also an odd fit. The character of George was beaten down and weak, and Burton was a force of nature. Despite a screen test with Richard Burton that confirmed these things, Lehman agreed. If it meant Liz would play Martha, it would be totally worth it. So Lehman visited Liz and Richard in Paris while they filmed The Sandpiper. Over lots of champagne and caviar, they discussed the film. Richard Burton demanded makeup tests and a cameraman who would keep his face from being distractingly pockmarked. This, despite Burton's handsomeness, was something he was very insecure about. They also discussed how to age up and de-beautify Liz, which was a journey, let me tell you. It is not easy to make the most beautiful woman in the world not so beautiful. As a parting gesture, Burton let Lehman know that hint, hint, nudge, nudge, Elizabeth's last producer gave her a diamond and emerald pin. Lehman replied with, wonderful, because she'd never want two of those. I love Lehman. It is so funny in the book. He is constantly being told, or it's being very strongly suggested, that in order to satiate Liz, he should buy her this expensive, like, jewelry. And he always refused. He just thought it was so ridiculous that someone who was making such a huge salary should be gifted something so expensive. So, like, on principle, he just, every time it was suggested to him, he would make these hilarious comments and he just refused to do it. And I thought it was really funny. It's throughout the whole book. So another topic that came up in the meeting was who would direct the feature. So well-known industry names were tossed around, but the Burtons insisted on someone being in the running, someone who had never directed a film before. That someone was Mike Nichols. Now, we know Mike Nichols for films like The Graduate, Catch-22, The Birdcage, Primary Colors, and Closer. And I mainly remember him because he was married to Diane freaking Sawyer. But at that time, he was known for his comedy act Nichols and May on Broadway. Nichols met Burton while he was doing Camelot in the adjoining theater, and they became very friendly. Nichols visited Burton on the Cleopatra set and then became friends with Taylor. So by 1964, Nichols directed the hit Broadway play Barefoot in the Park by Neil Simon, which earned him a Tony Award. It was the same year he discovered that Taylor had been approached to play Martha. So he called her agent and stressed that he wanted to direct the film adaptation. He saw the play on Broadway and was stunned by it. With Taylor and Burton's approval, Lehman offered it to him. But Nichols was worried about the Hollywood version of the play. One point of contention between Lehman and Nichols in regards to the script was that Lehman made Martha and George's imaginary child, which was the central metaphor in the play, real in the screenplay. It would become an ongoing war between the two of them throughout the process and foreshadowing for what was to come. But spoiler alert, Nichols won this and the child stayed imaginary. Thank God. Now to cast Nick and Honey, the guests in the play. Nichols wanted Robert Redford. Now you have to remember, at this time in the early 60s, Robert Redford was not the famous Robert Redford that we know now. Robert actually refused it outright, saying he was never a fan of the play, and it was a statement he would later regret and admit he was wrong about. I feel like this has happened a lot with this play where people have very strong reactions or negative reactions, and then they admit later that they were wrong or that they wanted to be a part of it. Just a funny little note there. So Nichols' second choice was George Segal, who would ultimately play the role. Now, of course, George Segal had a crazy career, super impressive, but I always remember him as Kirstie Alley's sleazy beau and Mikey's illegitimate father in Look Who's Talking. Anyone remember those movies? Yeah. Yeah, I feel bad, but that's really what I remember him from. It's not a very, flattering role, but he did it well. Nichols also had his eye on Sandy Dennis for Honey. She was a Broadway gal recently winning a Tony for her role in A Thousand Clowns. The 27-year-old was quirky and an acquired taste, the antithesis of Hollywood, which worked in her favor because she posed no threat to Taylor and her beauty, so Taylor accepted this casting choice. While Nichols and Lehman battled over the script, the Burtons wrapped The Sandpiper and decided to have a second honeymoon in Europe, which made them unreachable. They were intentionally indulging after a grueling 3 years of making 6 films. No one knew exactly where they were or how to reach them. Yet the most important detail Lehman extracted from Taylor's secretary was the date the Burtons were planning to sail for New York, which was June 16th, meaning they wouldn't make it to the set of the film on June 28th when they were contractually expected to. So this caused many problems, obviously, one being for Liz's costume designer who needed Liz in person to fit them, causing a 2 to 3 week delay in production. The start date became a major conflict, pinballing between Jack Warner's office and the Burtons' agents and lawyers. The result? The production would just have to accommodate the Burtons' late arrival in Los Angeles on July 1st. Now, since that was the Thursday before the July 4th weekend, the official start date would actually be July 7th after all. Taylor's $1 million contract included an additional $100,000 for every week of production that went over schedule. It was a cost to ensure the Burtons' happiness, and it wouldn't be the last. Before the Burtons were set to arrive, Lehman spiraled, namely on what to send them as a gift. Jack Warner had sent them a huge floral arrangement, 6 bottles of champagne, a case of scotch, and a case of gin. Nichols sent them a pound of caviar. The Burton secretary told Lehman to send a simple spring flower arrangement to their home. For Richard's dressing room, just like lots of liquor and fruit. For Liz's dressing room, he said that Liz preferred flower arrangements of moderate size and in good taste, so white lilies of the valley with white roses sprinkled throughout. He added that a lovely touch would be a bottle of Dom. The first day of rehearsals was on July 6th, 1965. It began with the Burtons' chauffeur-driven, air-conditioned black Cadillac limousine pulling up to the Warner Brothers lot at 10 a.m., with everyone present. Prior to this, the studio had distributed an official list to all production personnel at Warner Brothers titled How to Treat the Burtons. Number 10 on the list instructed employees not to address the Burtons unless they initiated a greeting first. But all of that pomp and world-famous glamour fell away at that first morning rehearsal with the 4 actors sitting at the table on stage 2 reading their lines. When they began the first read-through, it was a question as to whether or not Liz could mine the depths of Martha. But Taylor delivered, in a way, satisfying Lehman and Nichols. They were relieved to see parts of the character shine through. Liz would later confess that in her entire career, she had never been asked to rehearse before or read the script at a table all in one sitting. So by midweek, things started to turn a little sour. The Burtons had hardly arrived when they were required to attend the premiere of The Sandpiper, forcing Liz to leave rehearsal early on the second day. She then began complaining to Nichols that her contract stipulated she did not have to report to set earlier than 10 a.m., when in reality, her contract specifically required her to be there at 9 a.m. All of this was compounded by the fact that Nichols was feeling the weight and the responsibility of the project and doing right by Albee, who by 1965 had truly become a great American playwright. And Lehman was determined to maintain an equal status to Nichols, often putting them at odds with each other. They were, however, a united front when it came to censorship. As it stood, the script would not pass the industry censor's tough decency bar. The Motion Picture Association of America was strict, and according to them, the script still had a fair amount of salty, sexy words in it, despite their notes on the original play. And that's not all. The film had to also pass the standards of the National Catholic Office for Motion Pictures. Warner hoped for an A-4 rating, which meant morally unobjectionable for adults with reservations. This would mean the widest distribution in movie theater chains throughout the country. In the end, all that was given up were 2 Jesus Christs and 1 goddamn. And I should say, one of those Jesus Christs is the first line in the play, which is, I think, an
We
audio
put that
clip
in the
that
last episode. Yeah.
cut for the movie.
Not
Nichols
here, though.
not here, not on our watch. We have no censorship. Nichols refused to shoot protection shots or loop any words that could be slipped in after the fact in case censors made them cut what they had. Nichols really wanted to protect the play at all costs, and he wanted to protect Martha, lamenting that Liz, unlike everyone else in the cast, simply couldn't get away with playing herself and still be believable as the character. She was embarrassed to be given line readings, but Nichols complained that she kept reverting to a higher pitch when she spoke, and he'd ask her to lower it to fit the willful 48-year-old Martha, an age they settled on from the 52 Martha in the play. Nichols even said to Lehman the night before rehearsals were to begin that they should have cast Betty Davis instead. He said asking Taylor to play Martha was like asking a chocolate milkshake to do the work of a double martini. Now, Megan, what would you rather be, a chocolate milkshake or a double martini?
A chocolate milkshake.
Me too. So I don't think it's that bad of a thing. So during rehearsals, the Liz Burton dynamic started to rear its ugly head. Burton began acting like a drama coach at times, often admonishing Liz as she read her lines. He'd take her to task about that pitch, her voice, and not understanding text. Siegel, who played Nick, said it was a real student-teacher relationship, making it hard for the others in the room to tell whether or not they were getting into character or if they were simply witnessing the husband and wife dynamics of the two. But Burton could really trigger Liz with his criticisms, making her storm out in tears. Liz would later describe it as cathartic, saying we would get all our shouting and brawling out on the set and then go home and cuddle. The Friday of the first week, yes, can you believe we're still in the first week of rehearsals? Liz's good behavior turned to rage. She seemed to tap into Martha everywhere except the actual read-throughs. One, the Burtons saw and hated The Sandpiper and called it a pile of crap, even though a review claimed Taylor had given the best performance of her career. Apparently, she cursed that reviewer's name all day long and threatened to sue him for libel, and then went for her agent, threatening to fire him because of that 9 a.m. call time. Then Liz was angry about having to be fully made up as Martha for the first time, which led to her complaining about being tired from rehearsals, which led to her being tired of being forced to lower her voice and project from her diaphragm. Then she tried to renegotiate Martha's age again, saying the character could just as easily be 33. It was clear she was imploding from the pressure of the role. Regardless of this tirade, Liz went through with the full costume and makeup that day, and the effect was actually remarkable. It was the transformation they were all waiting for. In week 2, they moved from the table to the set of George and Martha's house, and the publicity department had arranged a morning photography session for the press. More than 60 press photographers from all over the world showed up. Liz demanded that Lehman let the press know that he and Mike ordered her to get fat for this picture. She said, "I want you to tell them I was ordered to stuff myself and drink malted milkshakes between meals for the realism of the role." This is where the most widely published pictures of the production originated, showing Burton lying on his back on a bed with Taylor sitting alongside him. Originally, she was supposed to be on top of him, but it was deemed too scandalous. The day shooting began on Monday, July 26, 1965, which meant more gifts. Some highlights. Lehman sent 24 white roses to Taylor's dressing room. Nichols gave her a bassinet for Martha and George's imaginary child filled with bottles of bourbon. Now, the plan was to film as much of the movie in sequence as possible. Taylor and Burton arrived at 10 a.m., eye roll. Siegel and Dennis didn't need to be there because their characters didn't appear until 15 minutes into the film. But Taylor's makeup and hair transformation took almost 2 hours. So Nichols didn't start shooting what would be his first printed take until afternoon, beginning with George and Martha coming into the house through the front door. So Nichols said that Taylor was a physical actress and helped her to understand her character in a number of ways. One example would be the first time Liz opened the fridge door on set, she discovered what she described as a complete portrait of the total disorder of Martha's mind and Martha's life. Nichols had an ear of corn all chewed and put away. There was a tangle of leftover spaghetti on a plate. A can of beans had been opened and left completely full with the lid folded back. Now, we, the audience, don't see any of this. It's all for Liz. Another example is Nichols gave Liz the task of eating a cold chicken leg as she describes the movie she wants George to remember, in which Bette Davis says, "What a dump." So there's a famous point in the movie and the play, but mostly the movie, in which Martha is repeating the line, "What a dump," and trying to figure out what movie it's from. And the movie it's from is actually Beyond the Forest in 1949, starring Bette Davis. But she doesn't say it like Bette Davis.
What a dump. Hey, what's that from? What a dump.
How would I know?
Oh, come on. What's it from? You know.
Martha.
What's it from, for Christ's sake?
And Bette Davis, because it was so famous, would take that line and start her comedy shows with it. So she would walk on stage and say, "What a dump." But she would do it in Liz Taylor's rendition and the way that Liz Taylor was trying to mimic Bette Davis. So it's these like multi-layers. Also, I was thinking about this too. If Bette Davis played in the actual movie, how would they service
It'd be
this
very
whole
meta.
Yeah, very meta, exactly. But this is a whole famous part, and that line became something people quoted, and Bette Davis ended up using. So funny. I think it's funny. By the end of the first day, Nichols realized he may have to cut Liz's performance into very small bits, since he wasn't getting what he wanted in long takes. It might have been Nichols' background in theater as a stage director that had him envision the shoot this way, continuous action. But Liz was used to working scene by scene. By the end of the first day, they shot a total of 1.25 pages, 1 minute and 54 seconds of usable film. They watched the rushes the next day and were relieved. Even Richard, who was, as we know, very self-conscious about his pockmarked face, he said it was the first time he watched his own rushes since 1945. So despite the progress made in that first week, the mood on set was tricky. So on August 21st, 1965, the cast of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and the crew flew to Hartford, Connecticut to film on campus at Smith College for the exterior shots of George and Martha's home and the college itself. Now, the Burtons hate to fly, so they did what everybody does when they hate to fly. They sit on the wing over the wings and they drink vodka tonics before 10:30. Honestly, same. I hate flying. I like to drink when I fly. It helps. Hundreds of people came to catch a glimpse of the Burtons arrive. The Boston Herald would later write that it was easier to obtain an audience with President Johnson than it is to break through the security protecting the Burtons in this normally quiet city. So the single opening exterior shot, which is 1 minute and 51 seconds, needed to be reshot the following night. Apart from some mess ups with the press, it was in Smith's College's contract not to have anyone outside of the production, including press, on campus. The shoot went well. They still had a third location, though, in Northampton, which was a parking lot outside the Red Basket, a white clapboard roadside tavern. It was another night shoot. It rained off and on, preventing them for shooting for days at a time. It took Wexler, the cinematographer, too long to set up the lighting. Moods were foul. It set the production back by 2 weeks and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So Taylor was due to be paid $100,000 per week for any work beyond the contracted shooting dates, as we know. And Burton was scheduled to be paid $50,000 per week. So Jack Warner asked Lehman to ask the Burtons to waive the $300,000 to save the production money. Richard agreed, so did the Burtons' agent, but their lawyers said, over my dead body. So they had to pay that. So the Burtons got richer and the production got poor. When the production returned to stage 8 after a month in Northampton, Nichols' insecurity struck again. He called Lehman after listening to the recording of the Broadway cast and said, here's what I think is going to happen. Sandy Dennis is going to be fine. George Segal is going to be fine. Richard is going to walk away with the picture, and everyone is going to say there was never a George like Richard Burton. But I just don't think Elizabeth is going to make it. Nicholas compared Liz to Uta Hagen. Lehman tried to convince Nichols against the idea, but it was just clear that Nichols wasn't convinced that Liz could do it. But that wasn't the only thing. Sandy Dennis, who played Honey, told Nichols when they returned that she was pregnant. And a little side note for people who don't know the play, the character of Honey experiences a hysterical pregnancy. So when Lehman learned of her condition, he didn't believe it because she wasn't married, making him worry about a scandal surrounding the production because apparently, pregnancy out of wedlock, big taboo. But Time magazine would later report that Dennis had secretly gotten married to her boyfriend, Jerry Mulligan, back in June. Studio planted story, whatever. Lehman was relieved. Side note, a week before the production ended, Liz threw Sandy a beautiful baby shower. But 1 week after the film's last scenes were completed, Sandy had a miscarriage. And this was less than 2 weeks after she played the scene in the play in which she cries,
I want a child. I want a child.
On principle?
I want a child. I want a baby.
So it's really sad. Although I think Sandy Dennis was quoted as saying that she wasn't really ready to be a mom at that time. So it didn't have the same tragedy or weight that it could have. But still a lot of real life and art imitating real life in this production. So the final month of production saw more delays. Liz didn't show up on set for several days because of an abscessed tooth. And she also had several days off a month in her contract during her period because she was known to suffer severe cramps. I would like that in my contract also. What about you?
Life contract, please.
Yeah, exactly. Another day was lost because of the custody lawsuit for Elizabeth and Eddie Fisher's adopted daughter. And then a full day was taken up for a set-related thing. But then something happened amidst all of these delays and frustrations. A shift. There's this amazing soliloquy in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and Liz knocked it out of the park. People were saying she could win an Oscar for that alone. But Nichols thought in the overall arc of the character, it was too emotional. She was being too emotional. She'd have nowhere left to go, which Richard actually agreed with. They had to think about the whole picture, not just this isolated moment in Liz's performance. She was obviously furious, but to her credit, she did it again with more restraint this time.
George, who is out somewhere there in the dark, who is good to me, whom I revile, who can keep learning the games we play as quickly as I can change them, who can make me happy, and I do not wish to be happy. And yes, I do wish to be happy.
So on Monday, December 13th, after 5 months of shooting, the production finally wrapped. You know what that means? More presents. And guess what? Lehman actually caved and got Liz a 175-year-old turquoise and gold pendant with a pearl and platinum chain, which Liz loved, obviously. So in the end, the movie was almost 2 months behind schedule and almost $2 million over budget. And this is 1965. The total cost was $7.5 million, which at the time made it the most expensive black and white living room drama to come out of any Hollywood studio. Albee saw an advanced screening. He said Betty Davis and James Mason would have made a much better film. He also said the adaptation was, I guess, better than a kick to the teeth, which is actually a Beckett quote. So he was he didn't hate it, but he didn't love it. He also said that it wasn't really an adaptation because, with the exception of 2 sentences, he wrote every word. So the film premiered on June 21st, 1966 at the Pantages Theater in Los Angeles. The film received endless praise from reviews and audience goers. It received 13 Oscar nominations, including Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress and Best Actor, making it Burton's 5th nomination. Both Sandy and Liz won, but Burton lost out to Paul Scofield for A Man for All Seasons. To be fair, it was stiff competition in the male category that year. I would have loved to have seen Burton win, but if he's going to lose to anybody, Paul's a pretty good, person to lose to. Here's a shitty little anecdote. Richard couldn't bear the idea of losing again, particularly with the likelihood that Liz could win. So he kind of manipulated her and told her that he dreamed her plane had crashed returning to California and that he found her body. Taylor, we know that she's afraid to fly because of this, opted not to go. But come on, we all know he didn't have that dream. Isn't that awful? She wasn't there.
Well, I remember in one of the videos I did that he made a comment that he felt like that did have something to do with it, that her star shone brighter than his, and that it did have something to do with the failure of their relationship.
Yeah. And he did admit that he was, and I think Liz admitted this too, that he was really supportive of her win and he was proud of her, but he was just dealing with his own ego and he just couldn't
Very
bear
insecure.
it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I just go, then you don't go. Don't make her not go.
No, exactly. You stay home. You feed the dogs.
So Anne Bancroft accepted the award on Taylor's behalf. But yeah, there it is. The film is considered one of Taylor's very best performances of her entire career. And in doing some research, I discovered that there's a new documentary coming out about Liz called Elizabeth Taylor, The Lost Tapes on HBO. It just premiered at Cannes, and apparently it's told all through Liz's own voice through these lost recordings, the lost tapes, obviously. And apparently it's incredible. So I wish I could have listened to that before, but it's just not out yet. So keep that on your radar.
So since you talked about Liz and Deck, I thought I would talk about one of the people that Liz burned during her life. And we touched on a little bit I touched on a little bit in my Elizabeth Taylor, Mike Todd, and then Eddie Fisher videos. And that is our dear, sweet Debbie Reynolds, which is interesting because there's going to be a Jack Warner connection in here. So let's go. Buckle up, Amy. I don't have 10 pages, but I've said. Mary Frances Reynolds was born on April 1st, 1932 in El Paso, Texas. April Fool's Day, interesting. Her mom was Maxine Minnie Harmon, and Raymond Francis Ray Reynolds was her father. She had an older brother named William, who was 2 years older than her. And I really love the days of nicknames. Like when everybody had a nickname, I wish that we still did those in that. I guess Megs is my nickname, but that's not as fun.
Do you have a nickname outside of
but
it's forms?
It's my last name.
Oh, okay. No.
Don't dox me, Amy. Ray worked as a carpenter for the Southern Pacific Railroad, and Minnie was an intense Protestant who attended the Church of Nazarene. Their belief systems were a mix of Congregationalist, Presbyterian, and Episcopal beliefs. It's a mouthful, if that helps you understand the general vibe in Debbie's house. The Reynolds were a working-class family who didn't have a lot, and Minnie would often take in laundry to help pay the bills. But as Debbie has said, they never went hungry, and her father made sure of that. Debbie had a pretty normal childhood for the time. She was a Girl Scout and was a member of the International Order of Job's Daughters, which is the youth affiliation of the Freemasons. When Debbie was 7, the family had left El Paso and headed west for Burbank, California. And it was in this burgeoning area of the golden age of Hollywood that things really started happening for Debbie. At the age of 16, while attending Burbank High School, Debbie won the Miss Burbank Beauty Contest. While the Reynolds may have moved states, poverty still followed them, and Debbie had entered the contest to get the free scarf and blouse that each competitor received. So she didn't even care about winning, she just wanted the free stuff, which, same Debbie, same. The judges for the competition flipped a coin to see who would get to sign her. And that's how she landed her first contract with Burbank-based Warner Brothers Studios. And if you've been wondering where the heck the nickname Debbie came from, it was from studio head Jack Warner himself. His reasoning was Debbie is a cute name for a little girl. So that's how Mary Frances became Debbie. That same year, she made her uncredited debut in June Bride. She would stick with Warner Brothers for 2 more years, only appearing in one other production, The Daughter of Rosie O'Grady. But then Warner stopped producing musicals, which was Debbie's vibe, and the other talent scout finally got his wish, and Debbie signed with MGM. I mean, she didn't do all that vocal training and kill off her Texan accent for nothing. Her first production under her new studio would be Three Little Words with Fred Astaire, Vera Ellen, Red Skelton, and Arlene Dahl. It was also at MGM where she would meet movie legend Elizabeth Taylor. The two would do their schooling together on the lot and got along well despite their differences. Debbie said it was because she was in awe of Elizabeth. During the 1950s, Debbie appeared in supporting roles in 2 Weeks with Love and You Belong to My Heart before landing her breakout role in Singin' in the Rain.
Good morning, good morning. We've gabbed the whole night through. Good morning. Good morning to you.
Nothing could be grander than to be in Louisiana.
She starred alongside Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor. The film was a massive success, and it should have been for the effort that Debbie put into it. She was not a dancer when she was cast in the role, a fact that Gene had mocked her for. Fred Astaire had found Debbie crying under a piano and volunteered to help her with her dancing after she told him what had transpired. Gene later admitted that he hadn't been the kindest and was actually surprised that Debbie was still willing to speak to him afterwards. We love a little bit of self-awareness. The scene for Good Morning took 15 hours to shoot from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., and by the end of it, Debbie's feet were bleeding. She later said that Singin' in the Rain and childbirth were the 2 hardest things she had to do in life. But Debbie wasn't just cracking out hits on the silver screen, she was also putting out multiple hit records, which is why it wasn't surprising that she became romantically involved with fellow teen idol Eddie Fisher. Eddie was one of the most successful artists at the time with 17 songs making the top 10 charts. The two had actually met for the first time while overseas entertaining American troops during the Korean War. Given that Debbie really didn't date in high school, friends said that boys didn't find her attractive, even though she won a whole beauty contest, and that she was tomboyish and didn't have any money. So of course she'd be wooed by the baby-faced crooner Fisher. 23-year-old Debbie married 27-year-old Eddie on September 26, 1955. The pair got to work quickly, and on October 21st, 1956, they welcomed daughter Carrie Frances Fisher, otherwise known as Princess Leia. Coincidentally, that same year, they appeared in the film Bundle of Joy together that premiered in December of that year. Debbie had been pregnant with Carrie while filming. At this point, Debbie had appeared in 15 MGM films, and her friendship with MGM colleague Liz Taylor was as strong as ever. Debbie and Eddie were often photographed out and about with Liz and her then-boyfriend, Mike Todd. So it only makes sense that when Liz and Mike took their vows on February 2nd, 1957 in Acapulco, that Debbie and Eddie would be at their side. A year later, the pair would welcome son Todd Emmanuel Fisher on February 24th, 1958. They named him after Eddie's bestie, Mike Todd. Not even a month after Todd's birth, Mike's plane would go down in the mountains of Albuquerque. Debbie rushed to her friend's house to console her, where she could hear Liz's cries of grief from the driveway. Eddie was in New York, where he had been preparing to present at Mike's Friars Roast, you know, the one Mike was on his way to attend. Eddie immediately got on a plane to be there to console Liz, and console her he did. Carrie has famously said that her father rushed to Liz's side, gradually moving to her front. Debbie had been told years prior by friend Frank Sinatra not to marry a singer, that they weren't faithful. And I mean, who would know that better than old Blue Eyes himself? And here Eddie was proving him right. Eddie left Debbie and the kids, moving in with Liz. It was the separation heard around the world. Yet Debbie didn't falter. In fact, she had 4 films premiere in 1959 alone. While the press was going jambon with the news labeling Eddie a philanderer and Liz a homewrecker, Debbie was painted as the innocent victim. And she was, but that doesn't mean she didn't have a vengeful streak in her either, and I love her for it. While Debbie kept her head down and continued raising Carrie and Todd on her own, she also held off on giving Eddie the divorce he so desperately wanted for an entire year. Sometimes I wonder if she did it in hopes Liz would come out of her fog of grief and come to her senses. Regardless, Liz and Eddie married the same day that Debbie and Eddie's divorce was finalized on May 12th, 1959. But do you think that got Debbie down? Heck no. She went and got married again, too. In 1960, Debbie married millionaire Harry Carl, owner of Carl's Shoes, which was, at one time, the largest privately held retail shoe store chain. She also continued slaying her career well into the 1960s, appearing in How the West Was Won in 1962, which had a star-studded cast with Henry Fonda, Gregory Peck, James Stewart, Agnes Moorehead, and Carol Baker, just to name a few. In 1964, she appeared in The Unsinkable Molly Brown, which earned her her first Oscar nomination, which was very impressive considering director Charles Walters had initially wanted Shirley MacLaine for the role, but realized a few weeks in that Debbie was the right choice, even if she was his second. As the 60s wore on, Debbie opted instead to spend more time with her kids and less time at the studio, which included Harry's daughter, Tina. Both Tina and Carrie were in Girl Scouts like Debbie had once been before, and Debbie would take afternoons off to attend their Girl Scout meetings. Isn't that cute?
It is so
She's
cute.
so adorable. In 1966, Debbie found herself on a transatlantic cruise with one Elizabeth Taylor. Debbie sent a note to Liz's room, and Liz sent one back asking to have dinner with Debbie. The pair reconciled over dinner. Debbie would later say that what happened with Liz and Eddie ended up being the best thing that happened to her. In 1969, she launched her own show, The Debbie Reynolds Show, where she made what she once called the stupidest mistake of her career when she went head-to-head with NBC over cigarette advertising after she found out that they had violated her contract by putting a Pall Mall commercial into her first episode. She ended up quitting the show, which cost around $2 million in lost revenue, and she kind of kicked herself in the pants on that one since 1971 saw the implementation of the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act, which banned the promotion of tobacco-related products on TV and radio. She was ahead of her time. Debbie definitely felt the loss in revenue when she divorced Harry in 1973 and found herself in a wee bit of financial trouble after Harry gambled away their fortune. She really knew how to pick them. But nonetheless, she persisted and continued working as she always had, going on to appear in Charlotte's Web in 1973. She also started doing guest spots on TV shows like Aloha Paradise and The Love Boat, and appeared in Irene on Broadway, which also toured the US. In 1983, she opened her own dance studio in Hollywood and even had an exercise tape called Do It Debbie's Way. She also performed at an AIDS fundraiser that year with Shirley MacLaine. 3 years later, she married real estate developer Richard Hamlet and went on to do a U.S. national tour of The Unsinkable Molly Brown on stage. In 1992, she purchased the Clarion Hotel in Vegas, which she named the Debbie Reynolds Hollywood Hotel, which also had a museum that housed her very robust collection of Hollywood memorabilia. Unfortunately, her marriage would end in 1996, and then the hotel would go bust in 1997, and she had to declare bankruptcy. But I tell ya, I would actually go to Vegas to stay at the Debbie Reynolds Hotel. That would have been the draw for me. Hollywood memorabilia? Yes, Debbie. She would go on to play Bobby Adler in Will and Grace, as well as our beloved Aggie Cromwell in Halloween Town. She ended up starring in These Old Broads alongside Shirley MacLaine, Joan Collins, and Elizabeth Taylor. The made-for-TV movie was written by her daughter Carrie Fisher and took a few jabs at the affair, as well as a character named Freddie. In 2010, Eddie died. No one was sad about it. He had said that he had been pressured into marrying Debbie, who he had barely knew, and that she had a dark side, but Debbie was the one that her children described as being sweet as apple pie. Meanwhile, Debbie had always said that her marriage was an unhappy one and that Eddie took issue with literally everything that she did. In 2015, Debbie received a Screen Actors Guild Lifetime Achievement Award, which Carrie presented to her. But then a year later, tragedy struck the family. On December 23rd, 2016, Carrie went into cardiac arrest while on a flight from London to LAX. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital after the flight landed, but she passed away on December 27th. Her death was linked to drugs that she had used a few days prior to the heart attack. She had been flying home for Christmas. Debbie had the table set, ready and waiting for her. The day after Carrie passed, Debbie was rushed to Cedars-Sinai after suffering a severe stroke. She passed away later that day on December 28th. She was 84 years old. Debbie's son Todd believed that grief played a role in Debbie's death. The loss of Carrie was devastating for her, and shortly before she passed, she had said that she wanted to be with Carrie. Debbie was laid to rest at Forest Lawn in Hollywood, and a portion of Carrie's ashes were entombed with her mother.
That's so sad.
And so, on that uplifting note,
I remember reading that about their closeness and that
she loved her so much, like even through all of Carrie's struggles, like she
yeah.
just always had her back and like was always there for her. And their love was just, I mean, I think we as a nation just loved Carrie Fisher so much.
Yeah, it's true. I have a question for you about Debbie Reynolds and the divorce from Eddie Fisher. How did the audience or the general public respond to her in that situation versus Elizabeth Taylor? Like Elizabeth Taylor was perceived as the other woman. How was Debbie really sympathized with? Did it
like
help her
heavily.
career?
Yeah. Well, Liz and Debbie, it bolstered both of their careers. They got to command higher salaries. Their movies were massive box office hits because of the scandal. It really drew people in. So even though Liz was being, thrown on the pyre of public opinion, she was still massively benefiting. Like Elizabeth Taylor has never taken a hit in her life. This woman is Teflon, and like no matter how divisive the opinions are about her, like she was everything to everyone.
Yeah.
And but Debbie was too, and Debbie was really seen as a victim. When Eddie put out his biography in the early 90s, just dragging every single woman he had been with, he said that like he was responsible for the success of Elizabeth Taylor's career, that he was like babysitting her kids and her dogs. When he said, I think I mentioned this in one of the videos in this series I did about Liz, but like the things he said about Connie Stevens, that he only married her because she was pregnant. But he had like 2 kids with her.
What a peach.
An atrocious man. And like luckily though, his career did not survive it. It crashed and burned his career. I think people did see him as taking advantage of Liz in that situation. He had obviously had feelings for her that whole time. And like Debbie had said, I never blamed him for falling in love with the most beautiful woman in the world. Like she couldn't blame him for it. But then she also, like her and Carrie had both said that they were so thankful that he did it. Because I think there's like one really good quote that I did from Carrie in a video where she said that she wanted to fumigate her DNA, especially like after his like biography came out, because she was just so disgusted by his behavior. Like Jolie Fisher said that he like would do drugs with them. Like he was just this absolutely horrific, disgusting human being. And, Liz was obviously like, Debbie knew that she was clouded by her grief and that she wouldn't have done it if she hadn't been so in such a state of grief. I do believe that she would have been with Mike Todd forever if he hadn't passed away. I believe that he was her.
That's just sad.
I know people think that Richard Burton was the love of her life, but I think that their relationship was really contentious and that they were drawn to that. But I think that her and Mike had that same level of tension, but there was also, I think, a great amount of respect and love there. And
there wasn't that they weren't directly
they're
in
in
competition
completely
with one
different
another.
worlds. Debbie knew that, and Debbie saw that, and I think Debbie was just waiting it out because she knew it would happen.
Debbie Reynolds in Halloween Town for me is such a balm for my soul.
She's such a grandma. She's like what you think of when you think of a grandma. Like she has a dish of butterscotch candies and she has a signature perfume and she gives you the best Christmas gifts and the best hugs. And she's just the grandma.
Yeah. she's a sweetheart. She reminds me of my Mare, I have to say, in looks and just demeanor. But yeah, she's Debbie Reynolds. What else is there to say?
I mean, the fact that she essentially she died of a broken heart, I just think says everything about her as a human being.
Oh, it's so sad. Hey, Megan,
Yes, Amy.
what do you think about the billions of cicadas that are emerging from the earth in, the southeastern United States currently that are set to last, I guess, what, a couple of months?
I think it's terrifying. Isn't this like one of the things that signals the end of days?
It is biblical in,
Like the four horsemen are supposed to
yeah,
follow?
it feels end of days territory. Well, apparently the last time, so it's like two broods that are emerging at the same time, and that's the anomaly. And apparently the last time this happened was 1803 when Thomas Jefferson was president. So it does feel strange that this is happening, but the actual, like, the people living it right now, like, I don't think I could leave my house.
Well, they swarm, right? Like they're like this like thick swarm. Because
Well, yeah.
I've always like thought of them in like the southern United States, like Louisiana, like it's like summer nights, the cicadas chirping, like it gives me that vibe, like a bayou
Mm,
and like a nostalgic, but this is horrifying. And apparently they're not going to be seen in Louisiana and they haven't been doing their annual
yeah.
emergence in Louisiana, which is unheard of. So that's like freaking people out too. But
Yeah.
there's this TikToker, her parents are deaf and she does amazing content with them. And her dad took a time lapse of a cicada emerging from its thing. It was horrifying. He was so enamored with it and his enthusiasm for it was amazing. It was adorable. I think it went viral. But like the actual like time lapse of this cicada emerging from its like exoskeleton, no.
I
No.
know.
They're huge.
They're huge, they're everywhere, and they're dumb, and like, I saw a TikTok where a woman had made a sort of helmet out of what looked um like a paper bag from a specific grocery store that I can't remember now. What's the more like high-end one in Canada? Whole Foods. She was wearing this and she was crying because she had to exit her vehicle, but she was so scared to just because you're stepping on them, they're flying in your
It
face.
feels a lot like the moth situation that we're dealing with in Vancouver, specifically in Stanley Park, because I don't know if
Right.
you went to Stanley Park. We went for a drive, I think last summer. It was like it was snowing. You could hear the moths hitting the car. They were huge. They were disgusting. They were stuck all over our grill. And like now, if you drive through the park, like it's the first time you can see light coming through the trees because they've had to clear cut so much of Stanley Park because of this moth infestation. But it was disgusting. And the streets were littered with their dead bodies and they were huge. They were like Jurassic Park moths. It was horrifying. You
Why?
could see in front of you.
How did I not know about this?
It's like been a big thing about these moths. There's been like people are like, oh, they're clear cutting Stanley Park, but it's because they're infesting these trees and they're disgusting and they're the biggest moths I have ever seen. So I'm imagining these moths if they had like gone through Vancouver and like hit coastal BC and gone into
Oh yeah.
Oregon, like how terrifying that would be.
But so I hope our friends in the areas that are affected are going to experience some relief coming up, because I really am thinking about you, all of you who are experiencing it. I feel awful.
Hey, Amy,
Yes, Megan.
I just wrapped up the Paris Hilton video. So now people know how far in advance we prepare these for you. But I just did Paris Hilton, and I was wondering, what is one of the things from the early 2000s that you miss?
Hmm. I miss my innocent relationship to celebrity.
Mm,
Because now we are inundated with truth, like truths about some people that I loved or idolized or really enjoyed watching on screen that now I can't watch them. It's awful because obviously I want to be aware of everything that's going on. I don't want to give my time and energy to predators and people who are just bad individuals. But there was something about that innocent relationship to a world that brought me comfort that I feel like has been completely slashed. Like my relationship to celebrity now, I couldn't be bothered. You know what I mean? Like it's just so not the same. Because I'm always waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm always suspicious. I'm like, well, what's going to come out about this person now? And I just don't have the same, yeah, I just don't have the same relationship to it.
I
Yeah.
totally know what you're talking about, because even we have too much access, and in that people like just make up the craziest stuff. Like even on the Kevin Bacon video, people were like, "Oh, I loved him except he's a Trump supporter." And I was like, "What?" They they are on this political thing like swing the vote left or something like that, where they want more Democratic candidates. And somebody's saying that he's a Trump, like a mega supporter. And I'm just like we have too much access. People believe too much about what they read, and it's so easy to search stuff, but like people lack that curiosity.
Yeah.
And I feel like
I
we didn't have to have that curiosity because we were only had access to what was being given to us. And it's even when people say to me now when I do my videos and they're like, "Oh, I'd be horrified if people knew that much about me." We only know what people offer us, even now. But some people are too attracted to the ability to let us know too much about themselves.
yeah, here's what I miss. I miss the novelty of something like the Oscars, where that's the time where you can actually see celebrities and what they're
Mhm.
wearing and what they're like in
It meant
interviews and
more.
it meant so
It
much
felt
more. Now
special.
everybody has an Instagram page. I can see everything. I miss the novelty of that era where things had value, and they were really exciting. Like I just
Mhm.
now I just feel like I haven't watched an award show in
Me either.
over a
Oh my
decade.
God,
Like,
the Much Music Awards. I missed the Much Music Awards so much. They were
yes,
so fun, and it was like such a
yes,
special time.
yep, I know.
It is so nostalgic. I also think it's funny because, as you've mentioned, you have a friend who's in, you know people. I think you can't be in Vancouver and not know people who are not in the industry.
Yeah.
But like sometimes, like I've Googled people that are close to both of us that are in the industry, and the things that are posted about them are so wackadoo, like net worth, who
Oh,
they're married to.
yeah,
And I'm like,
yeah,
I know who they're married to. That's not true. Like you're just, there's so much misinformation. I just miss the
yeah.
time when the information we were given was, even if it wasn't like, even if they were trying to cover up their tracks or whatever, it like came from their team, it came from their camp. And the only other like option was the National Enquirer, and then they were having alien babies. So it's just like,
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God. The old grocery store lineup
right?
rags. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I that's what I miss. I miss the excitement, the novelty, and the innocence. But again, but with that came a lot of things that were kept secret and were
Hmm.
protected that were really awful.
I know what you mean. It was a simpler time, a time of pagers and film cameras, and just, I would have to wait for Tom DeLonge to be on it, Much Music, so I could record his cute little face and watch it. We didn't have the access that we do now, which is both a blessing and a curse.
There's such a duality to it. Is what I mean. Like I miss it and then but I'm also really grateful for the things that it does give us. Um but yeah, I think that's because I was just going through the 2000s, which I seem to really mix up. Like I was hoping Felicity kind of crossed over into the 2000s, but they were late 90s, that show. But those shows, late 90s or whatever, like the Dawson Creek era
Hmm.
of like television, that was also a huge
I love the OC.
thing.
That was early 2000s.
Yep. Oh yeah. I see. I wasn't as into that one. But another thing I will say, I think the X-Men franchise, the live action, started in the 2000s, and I would love to go back in time and beg them not to make those movies. So yeah, that was like a painful period in my life because I'm such an X-Men fan. The new cartoon, like the new X-Men 97 is incredible. It's what we deserve. Finally, we're getting what we deserve. X-Men fans are getting what we deserve with that series. I know that I think they're pre-approved for 2 more seasons, and I just hope they keep going because it is unbelievable. And if you haven't watched the X-Men Assemble, the little mini doc on it, I strongly encourage you to watch it.
This is where people find out that you're a secret nerd.
Only with X-Men Marvel stuff, but I am a secret nerd, I guess, when it comes to that. Not so secret. Oh no, pretty. I don't know.
You're
But
pretty, you're a covert nerd.
But I didn't know you loved X-Men.
I do like the X-Men. I was grateful for the live action films because it gave me something to talk about on my Hollywood North walking tours that I used to do.
Oh, right, because it was filmed
They're
here.
filmed here.
Oh.
At the
So now
church
I
and
know
at
where
the
to
Wall
go
Center.
back in time to disrupt it.
Berard and Nelson.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm. So, Amy, we've talked about Liz Taylor. We've talked about Richard Burton. We've talked about Dear Debbie. We've talked about cicadas and X-Men. I think we need to wrap it up, huh?
I think so. This was a
Okay.
long one.
So, yeah, we hope you liked this one.
Have a great day.
And may the cult
Be with you.